The Dirt with me, Mike Howell, an economics podcast where I present the down and dirty agronomic science to help grow crops and bottom lines. Inspired by eKonomics.com, farming's go-to informational resource, I'm here to break down the latest crop nutrition research, news, and issues, helping farmers make better business decisions through actionable insights. Let's dig in. Well, hello again, listeners. Welcome back to The Dirt. Glad you're tuning in this week. I think we've got a really important topic to bring to you this week. We're going to be talking about the importance of soil sampling, and you may be wondering why in the world are we hitting this again? We've already talked about that. Everybody knows about the importance of soil sampling. Everybody knows these tough economic challenges that we're facing on the farm these days, and this may be a time to cut back on some of these soil samples. So we have a couple of gentlemen here with Waypoint Analytical that are going to talk to us and remind us about some of the important factors with soil sampling and let us know some of the economics behind that. Gentlemen, welcome to The Dirt. I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us what you do there at Waypoint. Alan, welcome. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey, glad to be here. Yeah, my name is Alan Meijer. I've been with Waypoint a little over 2 years now. I'm the East Coast agronomist, for lack of a better term. So pretty much cover all the East Coast states and the labs that fall in that geography.
Mick, will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Mick Goedeken. I'm for lack of better terms, the Corn Belt agronomist. So I've been tagged with that from my coworkers. I've been here for just a little over a year, and I cover from basically Idaho to Ohio.
Before we get into talking about the importance of soil samples, can y'all tell us a little bit about Waypoint Analytical, where your offices are located around the country, and how many soil samples go through the labs around the country?
So Waypoint Analytical has 7 agricultural labs. We're based in Memphis. Our largest lab is there, I would say. Then we have labs in Champaign, Illinois, Atlantic, Iowa, Grand Island, Nebraska. That's a new lab that we just opened. Then on the East Coast, we have labs in Wilson, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, and Leola, Pennsylvania, near Lancaster. As a company, across those labs, for the last few years, we've been getting close to 2.5 million soil samples a year. The numbers have been steadily increasing over time, and hence, the expansion into Nebraska recently.
That's quite a lot of samples coming in. I would not have guessed it would have been quite that many. That's good that we're getting that many samples coming through, and I hope everybody is taking advantage of these and doing what y'all are suggesting. This is quite valuable information. Waypoint has been looking at these samples for quite a while now. This isn't a brand new company. Are there any trends that are developing over the years? You know, we've talked in the past on The Dirt about the decline in soil test K levels over the last few years. Are y'all seeing any trends developing through what you're seeing there at Waypoint?
Yes, we've been around for a while. Our roots go back to 54 years ago. So you think about that, that's a lot of data and a lot of history we have. And we've watched that potassium decrease over the years. I would say in the last 5 years, we're starting to see that become more stable, or even in some locations start to rise. And I think part of that is growers are getting smarter and starting to realize, hey, we can't get enough potassium out there to raise this crop. Or in high potassium testing soils like the Western Corn Belt, hey, I'm starting to deplete this. I better start putting money back in the bank. And so we're starting to see those types of things. It varies on geography. I do a lot of summarization of data for the sales staff, and when I look at things, I look at phosphorus, and there's some areas where we're trending our phosphorus down. There's some areas where we're trending that phosphorus up, and then there's other areas where we're trending phosphorus as just holding stable. And certainly we've watched the zincs tend to follow the phosphates. The one thing that amazes me that we still have a problem with pH, and Alan lives in an area where pH is out of this world low to me, and I'm wondering how he manages to grow things. And he looks at me and he goes, well, you don't lime every year. So geography plays a lot into the soil testing world.
Yeah, definitely. I took a look at some data I had shared at the Mississippi Row Crop Short Course last year, looking at trends for let's say the states that are most represented at that, Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama, that area down there. What I recall seeing, if we look at the ratings, we provide sufficiency ratings based on the soil test value. So if we look at that, that's a way to help understand, are we low, are we high, are we where we want to be? The trends, let's say it was from 2020 to 2024. Two trends I thought I'd mention. One was sulfur. We saw less samples rated very low and more rated at optimum. So that's a shift in higher sulfur levels. For potassium, since interesting that you brought that up, fewer samples were rated very low or low, as well as fewer samples rated very high, and an increase in the optimum. So this isn't a real dramatic shift, but when you compare the two graphs and go back and forth, you can really see where things were changing. That's a regional trend. Mick mentioned regional differences.
Alan, that sounds like really good news. We're bringing the low end up to where it needs to be, and we're not over applying on the high end. We're bringing everything kind of closer to the middle where it needs to be. Is that what you said?
Definitely. And I think that's definitely a result of soil testing and the kind of work we do. It's the work of farmers that are taking care of their land and thinking hard about their inputs. The credit can go on down the line, research and extension, everybody.
Probably one of the most alarming things that I've seen in looking at some of these trends is in certain geographies, I start seeing organic matters going down. And I think that that's probably happening because we're pulling more crop off and we're not fertilizing to the extent of the removal rate. So we're actually mining organic matter to provide nutrients for us. So we need to really be careful of that because, in all honesty, organic matter is precious to us and we need to keep it where it is.
Mick, down where I am, we're lucky if we can even get organic matter to register on the scale.
Yeah.
I joke all the time about it must be a blessing to have as much organic matter as y'all do up in the Corn Belt. I understand what you're saying. Anything we can do to keep that organic matter where it needs to be, we need to be working on that. Great point. And Alan, back to your point about the sulfur, though, that's something that we've been talking about for several years is the need for sulfur since the Clean Air Act. And it looks like the growers are listening to that and starting to get those sulfur applications out there and get those levels back up where we need those as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It's no secret that there's some tough economic challenges in agriculture this year. Farmers are looking to cut every dollar they possibly can, make sure that every dollar they spend can be justified. One thing that they're looking at is soil sampling. Is soil sampling something that growers could consider cutting out in this year's budget, or is this something that they really need to make sure they take care of this year?
It seems a little self-serving for a guy from the soil lab to tell the listeners, yeah, you need to do more soil sampling or need to keep up with it. But there's a reason we did soil testing in the beginning, right? You don't want to guess at what you're putting out there to start. And when we develop technologies to measure what's in the soil and help us understand exactly how much we need, that's when soil testing and sampling, et cetera, grew. It doesn't change. We don't want to guess with these costly inputs. We need to know what we need so that we spend our dollar as wisely as possible and get the best out of it. I don't think when times are tough, that's the dollar you want to put back in your pocket and start guessing at that. That's where you still want to be sure of what you're doing. It's the basis for growing a good crop, in my opinion.
I'm all for our return on investment. Everything has to have a return on investment. And I look at soil sampling and the return on investment is always ignored. Growers don't acknowledge it. Retailers don't acknowledge it. Even myself working in a soil testing lab or for a soil testing company, I probably don't acknowledge it as much as I should. That return on investment is huge. If we actually test the soil and know what our goal is versus throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks, it makes a lot more sense. And in a year like this, where we're talking about record high fertilizer values, and we're dealing with a farm economy that doesn't look very good, crop prices are not the greatest. It's hard to be positive, but we have to go and use our best technologies to move forward.
Yeah, we've got some great technology. We need to take advantage of this. And I've got a good friend that used to be at Mississippi State, Dr. Bobby Golden. I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with that name, but I hear Dr. Golden say quite often, fertilizer is one of the very few inputs that is going to make you yield. All of our other inputs are going to be protecting that yield. Our fungicides and insecticides are protecting that yield. So we've got to first make that yield before we have anything to harvest. So don't skip on the fertilizers. And the only way to know if we've got the fertility out there is to get these soil samples in and make sure of what's out there before the season gets started. We're right in the middle of harvest now, depending on where we're at. Some people are getting close to finished. Some people are right in the middle. But when do y'all recommend for growers to take these soil samples? And how often should we be taking soil samples?
Consistency is the key. If they want to sample in the spring, continue to sample in the spring. The cool thing is we can shift from spring to fall and not see much difference in soil test values. But trying to be consistent is the time of year that we're taking those samples. Now, the how often, it depends on where you're at. That's a geography question. If you're in an area where you're going to need to lime every single year, you better be sampling every single year. Other places like in the Corn Belt, every 2 to 4 years might be adequate for taking soil samples. I'd love to say sample every acre every year, but in all honesty, economically, we can look at that in certain geographies and say, hey, every 2 to 4 years is enough that we can justify those soil sampling events.
Yeah, in the southeast here, North Carolina, Virginia, et cetera, generally people get to soil sampling right after the combine is finished picking corn, let's say. Some farmers want to see that four-wheeler in the field behind the combine almost. And then we could end up with a really wet fall or winter or early spring. So guys don't want to wait too long to get started in case things turn really wet. And then since we're also applying lime, a lot of lime, generally people want that lime out as soon as possible so it can start working. And then as we get closer to the spring growing season, guys tend to switch over to fertilizer at that point. So it's beneficial to everybody to get sampling as soon as possible in the fall. And yeah, like Mick said, the difference in frequency, again, in the Southeast, in my experience over the years, it's drastically different than versus, let's say, the Corn Belt. We're sampling most land almost every year and applying lime every year and fertilizer.
Y'all have alluded to this a couple of times, and I probably ought not even ask this question now, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway because it's one that I get on a regular basis. We take these soil samples, we get the report back from the labs. What is the most important thing that somebody needs to be looking at on this soil sample report? And y'all may have a different answer than what I'm thinking, but what's the first thing somebody needs to look at when they get that report back?
I don't know what Alan's going to say, but my first thing that I look at is pH. pH is the driver of every nutrient, and if our pH isn't right, we can't get all of the nutrients out of the soil. So to me, that's the most important thing that we look at. So that's the very first thing I look at.
I agree. Same thing. And a lot of our reports have some colored bars. There's a lot of things to look at. The pH isn't this big thing in the center that will draw your eye to it, but it is by far the first thing I look at. And I'm surprised at the number of conversations I've had with clients, and they're really curious about the result of some Bray phosphorus or something else. And I'm staring at a pH number that's way low compared to what I'm used to seeing in that area. And I said, what about your pH? Oh, yeah. Okay, but right now I want to know about this. I'm like, No, really. Do you guys apply lime? Well, we're going to apply some lime. I mean, we're talking it's 2 points off of what it was in the low fives when I expected it to be in the upper sixes, let's say, for that area. And maybe there was a reason at that time for that client to be hung up about a certain reading, but it was clear that pH wasn't on his mind, and it really needed to be addressed. So, like Mick said, it drives the availability of so many of these nutrients.
That's the exact way I would have answered that question. I always want to look at that pH first because it is so important to all the other nutrients. Every number on that report is important. They're all going to be telling us something we need to know. That's the first thing I want to look at. And I can't tell you how many growers have told me when we look at a report, I can't afford lime. I'm going to put out my nitrogen, my phosphorus, my potassium. I can't afford lime this year. And my answer to that is if you can't afford lime, you can't afford to be farming. We need to make sure we get these pH issues right to start with.
If I could add on to that, you remember Oscar Ruiz. You've had him on as a guest before.
Oscar was our very first guest ever on the Dirt.
Yeah, that's right. And he is he's still with Waypoint. He's based in Memphis. I was talking to him yesterday, and one thing that he and possibly Mick and I will be looking at in the coming year or years is, testing lime quality, because we feel there's a chance that some clients aren't paying attention to the quality of lime that they've got and how that affects, when they look at our prescription, our recommended amount of lime. If they're not taking into account both the CCE and the quality, so let's say, different states have a different term for it, effective neutralizing value, effective CCE, different ENV, whatever. If you're going to be considering pH to be so important and liming to be important, we need to be aware of how effective that lime is that we're using and how to adjust and compensate for that.
Alan, while we're on this subject, we'll throw this one out there because it's a question I get asked all the time. What about pelletized lime? Is that something we can use to help get these pHs back where they need to be? And I know my opinion on this, but since y'all are the experts, I'll ask y'all, what's your opinion on pelletized lime?
I don't know if I have an opinion on it, to be honest with you. I'll punt it over to Mick. I think we have high quality lime in the East, so it's not something that I've seen guys even dabble in per se. I've dealt with it more on the homeowner level, obviously, and usually I think the recommended amount is to, you need to increase maybe 10% to account for that pelletized nature. But really, Mick, I don't know if you've got a different opinion on it.
My opinion is ag lime is where we need to start. Now, if we get our pH, I'm going to use a Corn Belt example. Our soils in the Corn Belt are not naturally acidic like Alan's are, and we're driving that acidity through nitrogen use using nitrogen-based fertilizers. So if we can get our pHs right with ag lime and then come in with maintenance levels of pelletized lime, I think we can do that and manage it. As far as getting our pHs corrected with a pellet lime, we can't do it. We can't apply enough because it becomes way too costly to try to do that.
Mick, that's exactly what I'd seen over the years. It takes a little bit longer for that pelletized lime to neutralize that acidity, and we just can't get enough of it out there cost effectively enough to make it justified. I've got another question. This is going to be my last question for you guys. We've talked a lot about making sure we're applying these nutrients at the right rates. Is there a nutrient that y'all are seeing that people are under applying or over applying based off of the data that y'all are getting in through these labs?
I don't know exactly how to answer that question. I would say, we've talked a little bit about the trends that we've seen, but I did look at some data yesterday. I was asked to provide some for a client. So it covered 2 states and a number of locations, let's say. And it was interesting, the phosphorus in the one state, there was a steady increase over the last 5 years, 6 years in the average phosphorus test level. And in the other state, for the first 2 years, it was a steady increase, and it dropped over the next two just as substantially. Listen, I looked at that last night. I wasn't able to take a deeper dive into it. I would need to think about where that pee is coming from poultry litter or whatever. Certainly in the east, we do have a lot of poultry in North Carolina, turkey and chicken. It's worth a harder look at by me for sure.
I would kind of agree with Alan. Maybe we've seen a shift with the use of phytase in a hog's diet. These guys, for years, they were putting on hog manure for the phosphate, and now we don't have that phosphate in the hog manure. Now we started to see a little bit of maybe a slip in the phosphate values. They realized, oh no, now I'm starting to see that slip. I've got to apply some commercial fertilizers in that case. The other one that I can think of, besides, we've talked about potassium a little bit. Alan mentioned sulfur. I think we're doing a better job today with sulfur than we have in the last 4 or 5 years. I grew up in the Western Corn Belt in Nebraska. We've been using sulfur for my entire career, and before that, 25, 30 years, we've used sulfur and managed those sulfate deficiencies, where it wasn't until recently, as you go east from Nebraska, that we started using a lot of sulfur and started seeing those sulfur deficiencies. And so I think that's one that we've gotten better with. Are we there 100%? I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of sulfur deficiencies. As I drive across my territory, I'll see a sulfur deficiency and shake my head and go, gosh, we just need to educate these people and help these people out.
Mick, that's one nutrient we've spent a lot of time talking about over the last 4 years. We've covered it probably as much as we've covered any nutrient. I'm seeing the same thing. Sulfur deficiencies are pretty prevalent, but I think we are gaining on that problem. Guys, I really appreciate you taking time to visit with us today. I think we've covered a lot of topics here. Is there any closing comments you have for our listeners before we wrap this episode up?
We're going into some tough times, some unknown things this coming year. Continue to do what you plan to do for the past several years. Utilize those soil tests. Don't change your sampling intensity. Stay with the course, because if you go backwards, it's harder to come back forward.
Yeah, I agree. And just want to thank everyone for their business. And we're adding more capabilities at Waypoint. And Mick and Oscar, we're excited to always help out those that want to call and ask questions. It's a great job, and we're just thankful to be a part of it.
Guys, once again, I really appreciate it. Listeners, thank you for tuning in this week. And if you'll hang around for just a couple of moments, we'll be right back with segment 2. Farming isn't farming without questions, and now there's a place to go for answers. At eKonomics, an entire team of agronomists is waiting and ready to help for free. No question is too big or too small. Visit Nutrien-eKonomics.com and submit your question with the Ask an Agronomist feature. Hey, listeners, welcome back for segment 2, where we ask one of our agronomists a question of the week. We're here in Canada recording these episodes today. We've got Mike Howell in the studio with us. Lyle, welcome back.
Thanks again, Mike, for having me.
Lyle, it's getting into the fall now, and a lot of people are thinking about taking these soil samples and making sure that the nutrients in the soil are what they need to be going into this next year's crop. The question this week is, how deep should I take my soil sample, and does the crop that I'm intending to grow next year make any difference in the depth of these soil samples?
When you first mentioned this question, Mike, I think I said that I could give you any answer and it will be both right and wrong. You can ask 10 people what the right answer is to soil depth for taking a soil sample. You'll get different answers, and they're not necessarily wrong. Probably the bigger question is, why aren't you taking soil samples to most farmers? So let's first step, take a soil sample, do it properly, do it topographically, do all the good things in taking a soil sample. When it comes to depth, there's two risks, I think. And honestly, over my career, I've taken thousands of soil samples for both in research plots and in farm fields. And there's two mistakes a person can make, I think, in terms of depth. One is to sample too shallow. To me, we're trying to explore and measure the amount of nutrients that are available in the root zone of the crop that you are going to grow. So in your growing season, in your crops that you grow, if most of the nutrients are taken up in the top foot of soil, top 25, 30 centimeters of soil, then take your soil sample from that depth. You might want to split it. You might want to split that into 2 different depths. But think about that what we're trying to do is measure the nutrients that are available to the crop, to the rooting depth that crop may grow. That might be different for a wheat crop, or compare that to a very deep-rooted corn crop that might access deeper nutrients. So don't go too shallow. What is too shallow? I don't think that there's any crop that should be depending on only a sample of only 15 centimeters, 6 inches. We need to go deeper than that. We know that almost any crop will access nutrients deeper than that. So too shallow means something less than 25 or 30 centimeters, I think. You might want to split that. There might be a more concentration of nutrients like phosphorus or potassium near the soil surface, and you may want to sample even deeper to access and measure the more soluble nutrients like nitrates and sulfates to greater depth. But I think that's our starting point. Now, can you sample too deep? You actually can. If your crop takes up 90% of its nutrients in the top 30 centimeters of the soil, then why would you sample to 120 centimeters? Because if the crop is never going to root there, you might be measuring things that you're not going to use anyway. And that happens a lot. There might be an accumulation of nitrates and sulfates 100 centimeters down or 70 centimeters down. If the crop can't use it, it just doesn't matter. So think about that in terms of going too deep. The other problem with going too deep is it just gets hard. It's hard to do a good sample to a greater depth, and mistakes are made. People mix up their sample depths. They don't actually get to the depth they say they did. There's more mistakes made when it gets hard to do the sampling. So I think within that context of being too shallow and too deep, I think we can find a happy medium for most people to get it mostly right. And again, there's no perfection in soil sampling. We just need to be mostly right in getting a good sample.
Great information, Lyle, and I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't taken a soil sample in the last 2 or 3 years, make sure you get out there and get those soil samples this fall so you know what's in the soil for next year. Listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in again this week. As always, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, you can visit our website. That's Nutrien-eKonomics.com. Until next time, this has been Mike Howell with The Dirt. Hey guys, if you like what you heard today, do us a favor and share this podcast with someone else. It could be your neighbor, your friend, your crop advisor, or whoever you think would enjoy it. Your support helps ensure future episodes, so please like, subscribe, share, and rate the show wherever you're listening from.